how far is too far in the name of science? We put our trust in scientists to push the boundaries of human knowledge, hopefully for the better. But what happens when that trust is shattered? In this video, we're exploring the dark side of research, where human lives were tragically thrown aside. From withholding life-saving cures to inflicting psychological torture, these are the 10 science experiments that went horribly wrong and left a permanent scar on the face of discovery. 10. The Milgram experiment. Kicking off our list at number 10 is an experiment that didn't leave any physical scars, but its psychological fallout was so profound it changed the field of ethics forever. The Milgram experiment. Back in 1961, Yale psychologist Stanley Milgram wanted to understand obedience. Specifically, he wanted to know how easily ordinary people could be pushed into committing atrocities, just like those seen during the Holocaust. The setup was as simple as it was deceptive. Participants were told they were in a study on memory. They were cast as the teacher and ordered to give what they thought were real, escalating electric shocks to a learner in another room for every wrong answer. But the learner was an actor and the shocks were fake. As the voltage climbed, the actor would scream in pain, complain about a heart condition, and eventually go silent, as if he'd passed out, or worse. If a teacher showed any hesitation, an experimenter in a white lab coat would coldly urge them on, saying things like, "The experiment requires that you continue." The results were bone-chilling. An incredible 65% of people administered the final, massive 450-volt shock, which was clearly labelled Danger Severe Shock. The experiment revealed a deeply unsettling truth about us, that ordinary people, when ordered by an authority figure, could inflict terrible pain on a complete stranger. The ethical backlash was huge. Participants had been lied to and put under immense emotional distress, believing they had seriously maimed or even killed someone. Some were seen sweating, trembling, and even having stress-induced seizures. The Milgram experiment became a disturbing parable about the dark side of obedience, and a key reason we now have strict rules to protect research subjects from psychological harm. 9. The Thalidomide tragedy. Number 9 is a catastrophe born not from evil intent, but from devastating negligence. The Thalidomide tragedy. In the late 1950s, a German pharmaceutical company developed a new drug called Thalidomide. It was marketed as a safe, over-the-counter sedative. Soon, it was found to be incredibly effective against morning sickness, and doctors started handing it out to pregnant women. The problem? The drug had never been tested on pregnant subjects, animal or human. At the time, it wasn't fully understood that drugs could cross the placental barrier and harm a fetus. The consequences were catastrophic. Between 1957 and 1961, thousands of women who took thalidomide gave birth to children with horrific birth defects. It's estimated that over 10,000 babies worldwide were affected. Many were born with phocomelia, shortened or missing limbs, while others suffered damage to their eyes, ears, and internal organs. A single pill was enough to cause permanent damage. An Australian doctor named William McBride was the first to sound the alarm in 1961 after he noticed a sudden spike in these birth defects. The drug was pulled from the market, but it was too late. The thalidomide tragedy turned into a global scandal that completely rewrote the rules for drug safety. It led to much stricter testing, specifically requiring that all new medicines be proven safe for use during pregnancy. It was a brutal lesson in the tragic cost of cutting corners. 8. The Stanford prison experiment. At number 8, we have one of the most infamous and controversial psychological studies of all time, the Stanford prison experiment. In August 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo built a mock prison in the basement of Stanford University. His goal was to see how people adapt to roles of power by watching college students act as either prisoners or guards. He recruited 24 healthy, stable male students and randomly assigned them a role. To make it feel real, the experiment started with a jolt. The prisoners were unexpectedly arrested at their homes by real police officers charged with fake crimes and hauled off to the mock prison. There, they were stripped, deloused, and given uniforms and numbers instead of names. The guards got their own uniforms, wooden batons, and mirrored sunglasses to hide their eyes. Their only instruction was to maintain order, with no real training on how to do it. They had all the power. The situation spiraled out of control with terrifying speed. Within just a couple of days, the guards became sadistic. They subjected the prisoners to psychological torture, forcing them into humiliating and pointless tasks and punishing them constantly. In turn, the prisoners became passive and emotionally broken. A rebellion on day 2 was swiftly and brutally put down by the guards, who used fire extinguishers on the prisoners. The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks, but it was shut down after just 6 days. The participants were losing themselves in their roles so completely that Zimbardo himself realized he'd lost control of the monster he created. The Stanford prison experiment is a chilling reminder of how easily a situation can corrupt people, turning good individuals into cruel perpetrators. It forced a hard look at the responsibilities of researchers and the profound psychological damage an experiment can inflict. 7. Henry Beecher's exposé. Number 7 isn't a single experiment, but a bombshell paper from one man that blew the lid off a rotten system. In 1966, Dr. Henry Beecher, a respected Harvard anesthesiologist, published an article in the New England Journal of Medicine called Ethics and Clinical Research. In it, he exposed 22 profoundly unethical studies that had all been published by respected researchers in major journals. For years, the scientific community acted as if unethical research was just the work of a few bad apples. Beecher's paper shattered that myth. He showed that researchers were systemically sacrificing the well-being of their patients for data. The examples he laid out were shocking. In one study, doctors injected live cancer cells into elderly patients without their consent. In another, they deliberately withheld penicillin from soldiers with strep throat just to see if they'd develop rheumatic fever. He even pointed to the infamous Willowbrook studies, where mentally disabled children were intentionally infected with hepatitis. In case after case, the subjects were vulnerable people, the poor, the sick, the institutionalized, who had no idea they were guinea pigs. Beecher didn't name names, arguing his goal wasn't to punish people, but to expose a system-wide failure. His Beecher's bombshell sent shockwaves through the medical world. His courage as a whistleblower directly led to new federal rules for human experiments and the creation of institutional review boards, or I4BS. These review boards are now required for any institution doing human research, a legacy born from one man's refusal to look the other way. 6. Operation Whitecoat. At number 6 is a strange and ethically murky program known as Operation Whitecoat. From 1954 to 1973, the US Army ran this project at Fort Detrick, Maryland, to test defenses against bioweapons. But instead of forcing soldiers to participate, the Army found a very unique set of volunteers, conscientious objectors from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Seventh-day Adventists are pacifists who refuse to carry weapons. The church leadership, however, saw this as a way for their young men to serve their country without violating their beliefs. The church actually endorsed the program, and over 2,300 Adventist men volunteered to be human test subjects. They became known as the Whitecoats. These volunteers were exposed to a whole host of nasty germs. They were either injected with or forced to inhale viruses and bacteria that cause diseases like Q fever, tularemia, and yellow fever. The goal was to study how the diseases worked and test new vaccines. Now, the Army insisted that the volunteers gave informed consent, but the ethics are complicated. These were young men given a choice: go to prison for dodging the draft or volunteer for a program that both their government and their church were pushing. Was it truly a choice? Proponents say no one died and volunteers were informed of the risks, but the whole idea of using conscientious objectors for military experiments feels coercive. The program was kept secret for years, and the long-term health effects on the Whitecoats were never properly tracked. It remains a complex and unsettling chapter in military research, caught in a grey area between patriotism and exploitation. 5. US military chemical experiments. Number 5 on our list uncovers the US military's long and secret history of using its own soldiers as lab rats. For decades, especially during the Cold War, thousands of service members were exposed to chemical and biological agents, often with no idea of the real dangers involved. At places like Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland, the Army ran classified tests on roughly 7,000 soldiers between 1948 and 1975. The official story was that they were testing protective gear. Volunteers were lured in with promises of better living quarters and easier duty, and were told they were helping the country. Then, they were exposed to a horrifying cocktail of chemicals, including nerve agents like sarin and VX, mustard gas, and powerful hallucinogens like LSD. One veteran, Bob Crafty, remembered being locked in a padded room and forced to breathe a nerve agent, feeling his body go weak as researchers watched him around the clock. Like so many others, he suffered from health problems for the rest of his life, but was sworn to secrecy, his medical records either classified or missing. And this wasn't just a one-off. Project 112 was another secret program that ran from 1962 to 1973, involving large-scale tests of chemical weapons. Navy sailors were unknowingly sprayed with nerve agents and other toxins to see how vulnerable their ships were. For years, the Department of Defense denied that these tests even happened, leaving countless veterans unable to get medical care for their illnesses. It was a staggering betrayal of the very people who had signed up to serve and protect their country. 4. The Tuskegee syphilis study. At number 4 is one of the most infamous betrayals of medical ethics in American history: the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. It began in 1932 when the US Public Health Service enrolled 600 poor African American men in rural Alabama into a study. Of those men, 399 already had syphilis. The goal? To simply watch them, chart the disease's brutal progression, and let it kill them. The men were never told they had syphilis. They were told they had bad blood, a vague local term for all sorts of sicknesses. In exchange for participating, they were promised free medical care, hot meals, and burial insurance. But the treatments they received were just placebos. The study was supposed to last 6 months. It went on for 40 years. The most unforgivable sin came in the 1940s when penicillin became the standard, effective cure for syphilis. The researchers didn't just withhold the cure, they actively blocked the men from getting it anywhere else. They needed their subjects to stay sick. By the time the study was exposed and stopped in 1972, the devastation was clear. At least 128 of the men had died from syphilis or related complications. 40 of their wives had been infected, and 19 children had been born with the disease. The revelation sparked national outrage. It led directly to the 1974 National Research Act and the principles laid out in the Belmont Report in 1979, which now form the bedrock of ethical human research in the US. But the Tuskegee study remains a painful symbol of medical racism and a deep scar that has fostered a lasting mistrust of the medical system in many black communities. 3. Unit 731. Entering our top 3, we descend into one of the absolute darkest chapters of wartime science. At number 3, the unspeakable horrors of Japan's Unit 731. From 1936 to 1945, the Imperial Japanese Army ran a covert bioweapon facility in occupied China, led by General Shiro Ishii. Officially, it was called the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. In reality, it was a factory of torture and death. Unit 731 performed human experiments of unimaginable cruelty. Their victims, mostly Chinese and Russian prisoners, were called maruta, which means logs, a name used to dehumanize them, to pretend they weren't even human. At least 3,000 people were murdered inside the facility, though some estimates go as high as 12,000. And that doesn't even count the hundreds of thousands more who died when Unit 731 tested its biological weapons on Chinese cities. The experiments themselves were pure nightmare fuel. To study diseases, they would deliberately infect prisoners with the plague, cholera, and anthrax. They performed live vivisections without anesthesia to see the diseases ravage a person's organs in real time. They amputated limbs to study blood loss. They froze prisoners' body parts and then poured boiling water on them to study frostbite. They put people in pressure chambers until their eyes burst from their sockets. They spun people in centrifuges until they died. Female prisoners were forcibly impregnated just so they could study the effects of disease and trauma on a fetus. And when the war ended, the horror was covered up. In a sickening act of political trade, the United States granted General Ishii and his top researchers full immunity from war crimes prosecution. In exchange, the US got their data on biological warfare. Not a single one of Unit 731's leaders was ever punished for their crimes. US government radiation experiments. At number 2 is a terrifying series of experiments that turned American citizens into nuclear guinea pigs. During the Cold War, the US government was obsessed with understanding radiation, and in its quest for knowledge, it blew past every ethical line. All across the country, secret experiments were being done on the most vulnerable people. In one of the most disgusting examples, from 1960 to 1971, the Department of Defense funded experiments on mostly poor black cancer patients. They were told they were getting a new treatment that might cure them. In reality, they were being blasted with massive doses of radiation so the Pentagon could study its effects on the human body, information it wanted for nuclear war. In another horrifying study, researchers fed radioactive oatmeal to mentally disabled children at the Fernald State School in Massachusetts. Between 1946 and 1953, in a partnership with MIT and Quaker Oats, they gave 73 boys breakfast cereal spiked with radioactive iron and calcium. They told the kids and their parents they were part of a science club, and it didn't stop there. Pregnant women were given vitamin cocktails laced with radioactive iron without their knowledge. And at the University of Cincinnati, a doctor exposed at least 88 cancer patients, most of them poor and with low IQs, to intense radiation to see how a soldier might react on a nuclear battlefield. At least 20 of them died from the radiation. These experiments were a profound betrayal, treating the most vulnerable members of society not as people, but as disposable objects in a vast, secret, and deadly atomic laboratory. 1. Nazi medical experiments. And finally, at number 1, we arrive at the name that has become synonymous with medical evil: the Nazi experiments. During World War II, German doctors, many of them highly respected in their fields, performed sadistic and lethal experiments on thousands of concentration camp prisoners. These weren't random acts of cruelty, they were a coordinated program designed to advance Nazi military goals and sick ideology. The experiments fall into 3 main categories. The first was to help the military. At Dachau, doctors like Zygmunt Rascher plunged prisoners into ice water to see how long a downed German pilot could survive in the cold sea. They locked prisoners in low-pressure chambers to simulate high-altitude ejections, causing agonizing deaths as their lungs burst. The second category involved testing drugs and treatments. At Ravensbrück, doctors intentionally wounded Polish women, grinding dirt, glass, and bacteria into the wounds to test new sulfur drugs. Others were deliberately infected with diseases like typhus and tuberculosis, just to test vaccines, or given poison to see how long it took them to die. But the third and most infamous category served the Nazis' twisted racial ideology. At Auschwitz, Josef Mengele, the Angel of Death, performed grotesque experiments on twins, injecting them with diseases and chemicals. He sewed twins together, trying to create conjoined twins. He performed countless other barbaric procedures that ended in unimaginable suffering and death, all in a depraved attempt to unlock the secrets of Aryan racial superiority. After the war, the world was forced to confront this medical barbarism. The trial of these doctors led directly to the Nuremberg Code in 1947, a landmark document in medical history. Its first and most important principle is that the voluntary, informed consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. The Nazi experiments are the ultimate and eternal warning of what happens when science is completely divorced from morality and used as a weapon of power. From the mind games of the Milgram experiment to the industrial-scale murder by Nazi doctors, these stories represent the absolute darkest moments in the history of science. They were born from a toxic cocktail of ambition, prejudice, and a chilling disregard for human life. But out of that darkness, something vital emerged: the ethical codes that protect us today. The Nuremberg Code, the Belmont Report, and institutional review boards were all forged in the fires of these tragedies. They are a constant reminder that the pursuit of knowledge can never, ever come at the cost of our own humanity. The stories we're telling in this video are a stark reminder of what happens when the quest for knowledge loses its moral compass. But these dark events, as hard as they are to hear, forced critical changes that protect all of us today. If you think this history is as important as we do, please make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our future deep dives into the hidden corners of science.